Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about sorting algorithms. Suppose we are given 10 objects, 11 objects, we are told to arrange them in a specific order. Anything it may be, we are going to arrange them in ascending order, descending order, on different varieties. The process is known as sorting. In algorithm, we are having different type of sorting algorithms such as quick sort, merge sort, binary sort. In this tutorial we are going to talk about quick sort. So let's quickly see what do we mean by quick sort. First of all, quick sort is a divide and conquer algorithm. It picks up an element as a pivot and partitions the given array around the picked pivot. Now we get a new word, pivot. What is a pivot? It's nothing, it's just any element. We name it as a pivot and we partition around the given element. Quick sort is a very famous algorithm because it is highly efficient and it takes less time compared to different sort. So suppose this is our example, an array of 8 elements. We choose the last digit 4 as the pivot. Now what we have to do is that arrange it in such a way that the elements to the left of the pivot are smaller than the pivot and to the right of the pivot are greater than the pivot. That is, suppose this is the position of the pivot. So all the elements here would be less than the pivot and here will be greater than the pivot. So let's see what will be the arrangement. So we put the pivot in the middle and the elements smaller than the pivot is put on the left side. So it could be like this, 3, 1, 2, or we can also have an arrangement like 1, 3 and 2. Both the elements are possible because we are not actually arranging the elements in an order. We just have to put them so that they are less than. Similarly, the elements which are greater than the pivot are put to the right. So it could be like 5, 8, 7 and 6 or 5, 6, 7 and 8. This would be our first step. So we could say this is step 1. So our first step is done. The elements to the left of the pivot are smaller than the pivot and to the right of the pivot are greater than the pivot. Now for the second step, what we have to do is that we now take the elements to the left of the pivot as a complete array and to the right of the pivot as a complete array. That is these 3 elements. This is a different array and this is a different array. Now we see that there are only 3 elements. We should always remember that we are not partitioning these elements into different arrays. We are just taking this for the simplicity of solving this. So 3 elements. Now of the 3 elements, this one would be our last element. So this one would be our new pivot. Similar steps would be followed. The elements which are less than the pivot would be to the left of the pivot and which are greater than the pivot will be to the right of the pivot. Now since there are only 3 elements, the pivot would come in middle element, that is 2, and the element less than the pivot, 1 would be to the left and the greater one, 3, would be to the right. Now we consider this side. Since this one is already arranged, so we are not taking this as our example, we will take this one as our example. 5, 8, 7 and 6. Similar step would be followed. There are 4 elements. The last element would be our new pivot. So we'll arrange it in such a way that the elements greater than the pivot would be to the right and the elements which are less than the pivot would be to the left. Here is our pivot. Now the elements smaller than the pivot, there is only one element, that is 5. So 5 would be placed to the left and the elements greater than the pivot, that is 8 and 7, would be to the right.
Yeah.
Now we see that the elements to the left of the pivot are fully arranged. Now only arrangement which is to be done is to the right of the pivot. We have taken 3 pivot elements. 2 was our pivot on the left side, 6 was our pivot on the right side, and the main pivot was 4. So now we have to arrange to the right side of the last pivot, which was 6. We see that there are 2 elements, 7 and 8. Obviously we'll take the rightmost element as the pivot, so 7 is our pivot. Now arrange in such a way that the elements less than the pivot are to the left and the elements greater than the pivot are to the right. So our arrangement will be like this. 8 is greater than 7, so 8 would be placed here. Now we see that the rightmost element is 8. So although this step is not needed, but just to make sure that the whole process is satisfied and completed, we take 8 as the pivot, and 8 is the only element left to be arranged, so 8 would be placed here only, and this completes our sorting process as all elements are sorted in order using the quick sort technique. So the sorting gets complete here, and now for the time complexity we'll have another video in which the time complexity of quick sort will be explained. So wait for the video and do subscribe, and if you have any queries related to quick sort or any other technique, you can ask us in the comments. Thank you.